My name is Lila Thompson, and I once thought that the hardest thing I would ever face was the death of my husband, Carl. He was my partner for over 30 years, and when he passed away suddenly, it felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under me. Grief became my constant companion, and I thought that would be my greatest challenge, to learn to live without him. But I was wrong. What followed, after the initial wave of sorrow had passed, was a test I never expected, a betrayal by the people I loved most, my own flesh and blood. I had underestimated how deep the hurt would go and how long it would take me to realize that love, in its purest form, wasn't something they valued. 2 years had passed since Carl's death, and I was still living in our grand home in Sonoma County, a sprawling property nestled in the hills that we had spent our lives building together. The house had once been a symbol of love and togetherness, but now, with Carl gone, it had become my prison. A prison, not because of the grief I carried, but because of the people who had moved in with me, claiming to want to help. My daughter, Emma, and her husband, Nathan, had moved in shortly after Carl's death. They told me it was because they wanted to help me adjust to life without Carl, to ease the burden of daily life. But I quickly realized that their reasons were far from noble. They needed someone to care for their 2 young children, someone to manage their household while they focused on their careers. And for reasons I now regret, I let them stay. I believed, foolishly, that family meant something, that my love and sacrifice for them would be enough to ensure they would treat me with the respect I deserved. The first signs of trouble were subtle at first. Emma would introduce me to her friends as Nathan's mother who lives with us, never once mentioning that this house was mine, a legacy left to me by Carl. Nathan, meanwhile, treated me as though I were just another part of their household staff. He'd ask me to clean up before his business meetings, tell me to tidy up the guest room, and make little comments that reminded me of my place. I was no longer the mother who had put them through school, the woman who had sacrificed her own dreams to support their ambitions. Instead, I was just another inconvenience to manage, a person whose presence was tolerated but not truly appreciated. I remember one afternoon, as Nathan casually asked me to arrange the house before an important meeting with clients, a bitter feeling gnawed at me. I'd spent years supporting him, paying for his education, helping him build his career, and now I was being treated as though I were a staff member, a servant in my own home. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that they were going through their own stresses, that I was being too sensitive. But deep down, I knew I was being pushed aside, my contributions taken for granted. The tipping point came on Nathan's 40th birthday. It was a day I had dreaded for weeks, and when the morning arrived, the clouds seemed to gather around me, mirroring the heaviness in my heart. I had been awake since 4 a.m., making his favorite dishes, beef Wellington, roasted potatoes, and a homemade creme brulee. Emma had insisted it be a casual get-together with Nathan's colleagues, but I knew casual in their world meant that I would be doing all the work. Nathan, sitting at the kitchen table, barely glanced up from his laptop when he said, "Mom, don't forget, the house needs to be perfect. Mr. Harrington is coming. He's a big client. This could mean a huge deal for me." His words stung, not just because of the way he dismissed my feelings, but because of the way he saw me, as nothing more than a tool to help him climb the corporate ladder. His words were like a slap in the face, but I nodded and swallowed my frustration. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, my voice flat, my heart heavy with the realization that they had reduced me to nothing more than a caretaker, a cook, a housekeeper in my own home. Emma, as usual, swept through the kitchen in her designer dress, too absorbed in her phone to notice my discomfort. "I've left the cleaning supplies in the hall closet, Mom," she said, her tone more of an instruction than a request. "The baseboards need to be wiped down, and make sure the guest bathroom is spotless. Oh, and remember to be discreet. I don't want anyone to know how we really live." Her words were like a cold knife to my heart, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. This was the woman I had raised, the woman I had sacrificed so much for, now telling me to hide the truth, to pretend that I wasn't the woman who had built this home, who had created a life for them. My family, my daughter, had reduced me to a secret, to something that had to be kept in the shadows, hidden behind the curtain of their well-crafted image. But I didn't argue. I couldn't. I had spent my life giving, loving, and sacrificing, and in my heart, I still hoped that one day they would see the worth of all I had done. Instead, I spent the entire day cleaning, cooking, and making sure everything was perfect. I prepared the food I wouldn't get to eat, I set the table with my grandmother's china, and I arranged the flowers I had bought myself, flowers that would soon be forgotten, just like my role in the family. By the time the guests started arriving, I was exhausted, and yet I couldn't stop. I watched from the kitchen window as sleek cars pulled up, their drivers stepping out in expensive suits and designer dresses. These were Nathan's people, people who saw their wealth as a given, a sign of success, and who looked down on those who didn't have the same privileges. I stayed in the kitchen, invisible, refilling wine glasses and serving appetizers, doing the work while Emma and Nathan took all the credit. As the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I wasn't just invisible, I was being erased. The house, once a symbol of love and family, had become a stage for their performances, a place where their success was on display, and I was nothing more than an accessory, a background figure who made it all possible but was never acknowledged. And I stayed. Because I had always believed that love, family, and sacrifice would be enough. But that night, as the party went on, I began to wonder if I was wrong. The evening wore on, and I moved through the house like a ghost, filling wine glasses, serving hors d'oeuvres, and cleaning up the crumbs left behind by people who had no idea how much effort it took to create the perfect evening. The conversations echoed from the living room, full of empty compliments and corporate talk. Stock prices, deals, vacations, and business success. They all spoke of things I didn't belong to anymore. Not because I couldn't understand them, but because I wasn't supposed to. I had never been invited into their world, and as much as I had given, it was clear that they had moved on without me. Nathan's laughter, that fake laugh I had grown so familiar with, rang out from the living room as he told another story of a business triumph. He was holding court, charming his colleagues, never once glancing my way. There I was, standing in the kitchen with a sinking feeling in my chest. I had cooked all the food, set the table, cleaned every room, and yet I was still nothing more than a servant in my own home. I had poured my life into raising Nathan, sacrificing everything for him and Emma, and yet they treated me like I was invisible. I couldn't bring myself to go into the living room and join them. I knew better than to expect anything from them. No acknowledgement, no recognition for what I had done. I wasn't their mother. I wasn't their family. I was just a background character in their perfect little world. Emma, too absorbed in her phone, had disappeared upstairs, leaving me to finish the cleaning. The scent of the flowers I had bought lingered in the air, but it wasn't enough to erase the feeling of emptiness that had taken root in my chest. This wasn't what I had imagined my life would be like after Carl's death. I thought I'd have peace, that I'd be surrounded by people who appreciated me. Instead, I was suffocating, trapped in a gilded cage that no one could see. Around 9 p.m., as I was wiping down the counters, a man I didn't recognize appeared in the doorway. He was older than most of the other guests, probably in his late 60s, with silver hair and an air of authority about him. His presence in the kitchen was unexpected, and I immediately felt self-conscious, still in my apron, with my hands wet from washing dishes. "Excuse me," he said with a warm but authoritative voice. "I'm looking for the restroom." "Second door on the right," I replied, not looking up. I was always busy, always working, always trying to make everything perfect, and I had no time for small talk with someone who didn't even know who I was. He didn't leave right away. Instead, he stood there, as though he was studying me. "I have to say," he continued, his voice taking on a different tone, "this food is exceptional. Did Emma make all of this?" I raised my eyes slowly, a sense of discomfort creeping up my spine. There was something in his voice, a knowing quality, that made me pause. I could tell he wasn't just making idle, small talk. "No," I said quietly. "I did." "I thought so," he said, his smile widening slightly. "She doesn't strike me as someone who knows her way around a kitchen." I stiffened, unsure of how to respond. The casual dismissiveness in his words about Emma's abilities stung more than I expected, but it also brought some strange comfort, A small victory for me that someone, at least one person, recognized my contributions. "I'm Richard Harrington, by the way," he said, extending a hand. I wiped my hands on the towel and shook his hand, a little surprised. Richard Harrington was Nathan's biggest client, someone he had been trying to impress for months. He was also one of the most influential men in the industry, and here I was, meeting him while covered in dishwater, invisible and forgotten. "Lila Thompson," I said, trying to keep my composure, but it wasn't easy. "Nathan's mother." "Ah," he said, his gaze softening. "Well, Mrs. Thompson, you should know that your cooking is better than most restaurants. Nathan is very lucky to have such talent in the family." Before I could respond, Nathan's voice called from the other room, loud and booming. "Richard, there you are. I was just telling everyone about the project we're working on." Richard glanced toward the living room and then back at me. "It was lovely meeting you, Mrs. Thompson. I'm sure we'll speak again soon." As he left, I stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where he had been. I was confused. Why had he said those things to me? Why had he singled me out in such a way? Nathan's voice cut through my thoughts again as he began to chat with Richard. He had no idea, none at all, how much that conversation had meant to me. In that brief moment, I had been seen, really seen, for the first time in ages. But the feeling didn't last long. The guests were still mingling, still talking, still laughing, while I returned to my duties. I didn't belong here. Not really. I wasn't part of their world, and as much as I longed for things to be different, the truth was starting to settle in my chest like a heavy stone. Around midnight, as the last guest trickled out, Emma and Nathan both disappeared upstairs. Nathan had a glass of whiskey in hand, and Emma was already making plans for her next spa visit. I, once again, was left to clean up the mess they had made. The house, which I had spent so much time making perfect, was slowly returning to the chaos of their lives, and I was left to sweep up the remnants. Nathan came into the kitchen, a self-satisfied smile on his face. "Good party," he said, not even looking at me as I stacked the glasses. "I think Mr. Harrington was impressed." "That's nice," I replied, my voice flat, the weight of exhaustion settling on me. Nathan took a long sip from his drink, still not looking at me. "You know, Mom, Emma and I have been talking. We've been thinking it's time for you to start looking for a new place to live." The words hit me like a slap, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. After everything I had done for them, everything I had given, they were planning to discard me. "This is my house, Nathan," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Well," he said, almost dismissively, "technically, it's mine now. Dad left it to me in the will. You have a life estate, but that doesn't mean you have to stay here. We think it would be better for everyone if you found somewhere smaller, something more manageable for someone your age." The words crushed me, the final blow. This wasn't just about the house. It was about how they had treated me, how they had never truly seen me, how they had reduced me to a burden. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on me. But I didn't cry. I didn't shout. Instead, I simply nodded. I knew I would have to make a choice, and I wasn't ready to accept this, not yet. But the decision had been made for me. I wasn't going to stay invisible anymore. The morning after Nathan's revelation, everything felt different. It wasn't just the weight of his words still echoing in my ears, or the way I had been dismissed in my own home, though both stung deeply. It was something else, something that had been building for a long time, but had only now come into focus. The scales had fallen from my eyes, and for the first time in years, I saw everything clearly. I was no longer just the mother, the caretaker, the unpaid help. I was more than that. And if Nathan and Emma thought they could push me out so easily, they were sorely mistaken. Emma was already gone when I woke up, as usual, rushing off to yet another appointment, her phone glued to her ear as she juggled a massage session and a lunch date. The kids were still asleep, blissfully unaware of the tension that had built up in the house. I made my coffee in silence, sitting at the kitchen table as I watched the sunlight filter through the windows, illuminating the dust particles in the air. For a moment, it felt like everything was still the same. But it wasn't. I had seen the truth, and there was no unseeing it. I couldn't believe I had let myself be manipulated for so long. The thought of the way they had treated me, like a servant in my own home, always invisible, always working behind the scenes to maintain their facade, made me feel sick. I had spent years putting their needs before my own, pouring my energy into making sure they had everything they wanted. And what had I gotten in return? Disrespect, disregard, and the complete erasure of my worth. But now the anger wasn't just an emotion. It was a force that surged inside me, something powerful that demanded to be recognized. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to face it, to take action. I wasn't going to let Nathan's words stand. I wasn't going to let them push me out of the house I had built my life in, the house Carl and I had shared. This wasn't just about a property. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my right to be seen and respected. I grabbed my phone and called Clarissa, my lawyer, the one who had handled Carl's estate. It felt strange, reaching out to her after all this time. I had always relied on Carl to handle the financial matters, trusting him to make decisions. But now, everything had changed. It was time to step up, to take control of what was rightfully mine. "Clarissa, it's Lila Thompson," I said, my voice steady but resolute. "I need your help. Nathan and Emma are trying to force me out of the house, claiming it's Nathan's now. I need to know what my rights are." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Clarissa was a seasoned lawyer, sharp and no nonsense. She didn't hesitate. "Well, technically, Nathan did inherit the house after Carl's passing, but you have a life estate. That means you have the right to live there for as long as you wish. He can't just force you out." The words hit me like a wave of relief. I had rights. I wasn't powerless, as they had made me feel. "Thank you, Clarissa," I said, my heart lighter than it had been in days. "I'll need your help to make sure he understands that." As I hung up the phone, a sense of determination settled in. I wasn't going to back down. Nathan and Emma had underestimated me, assumed that I would simply accept their demands and leave quietly. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness, but they were about to learn that I was far from weak. I had built a life, a business, and a family. It was time to remind them of that. I spent the rest of the day quietly planning. I needed to take control of the situation, and that meant preparing for the next dinner party. Nathan's birthday celebration had been a farce, and I wasn't going to let it end that way. I would use it to expose the truth, to reclaim my position, not just as a mother, but as a woman with her own power and dignity. The days leading up to the party were a blur of preparation. I ordered flowers, arranged the menu, and made sure everything would be perfect. I wanted to outdo myself. This wasn't just about food and decor. It was about making a statement. Nathan and Emma had played their games for too long, pretending that I was invisible, that my contributions meant nothing. Well, this time, they would see the real me. By the time the party arrived, everything was set. I wore my best black dress. Not one from a designer, but one that was elegant and well cut, a reminder that I didn't need their wealth to feel powerful. I had my own strength. I made sure the table was set with my grandmother's china, the silverware gleaming in the candlelight, the menu refined, beef Wellington, roasted vegetables, and a chocolate souffle that required careful timing. When the guests arrived, I kept my composure, greeting them with a calm smile and a steady hand. I moved through the crowd like a well-practiced hostess, serving drinks and refilling glasses. I could feel the eyes on me, the subtle whispers, the judgments they cast as they tried to figure out who I was and why I was still there. But I didn't flinch. I had nothing to prove anymore. As the evening wore on, Richard Harrington arrived. I had planned this too. Richard, Nathan's biggest client, was a man of influence, and he had no idea of the dynamic between me and my family. I made sure to approach him, offering him a glass of wine as he admired the setting. He was polite, respectful, and most importantly, he seemed genuinely interested in me, not just my son's success. As we spoke, I could see the shift in his demeanor. He was sharp, observant, and quick to realize that there was more to me than Nathan had led him to believe. In his eyes, I wasn't just the mother in the background. I was someone with her own achievements, her own worth. The conversation was brief, but it was enough. As the night went on, I couldn't help but notice the subtle tension that started to build. Nathan was on edge. Emma was too absorbed in her phone to notice, but Nathan kept glancing at me, as if unsure of what to do with the woman he had dismissed for so long. By the end of the night, it was clear. Nathan's world was starting to unravel. He had spent so long hiding the truth from everyone, pretending that his life had been built on his own success, but now it was all coming to light. The respect I had earned over the years, the work I had done, nothing had been in vain. I wasn't just Lila Thompson, the invisible mother. I was Lila Thompson, a woman who had built an empire, and it was time for Nathan to realize that. The morning after Nathan's birthday party, everything felt different. The house, once filled with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses, now stood eerily quiet. The usual hum of the morning, the sound of the coffee maker brewing, the smell of fresh bread, was gone. Instead, I sat in the kitchen, sipping my coffee, the weight of everything that had happened sinking in deeper with each passing moment. I had spent years giving everything I had to my family, to Nathan and Emma, hoping one day they would appreciate me. But now, I knew the truth. I had been a pawn in their game, nothing more than a stepping stone to help them climb higher in their perfect world. The conversation with Nathan the night before still echoed in my mind, but there was no room for self-pity now. The decision had been made. I wasn't going to sit back and let them dictate my life any longer. I was done being invisible. I was done being the one who always had to make sacrifices. If they wanted me out of the house, I was going to make sure they understood the consequences of their actions. I was going to take control, and I wasn't going to apologize for it. The first step was to call Clarissa, my lawyer. The fact that I was even in this position felt surreal. I had always relied on Carl to handle the legal matters, trusting him completely to make the right decisions for our family. But now, Carl was gone, and it was up to me to navigate this. The world I had built, the life I had worked so hard to create, was now in jeopardy, and I wasn't about to let it slip away without a fight. "Clarissa, it's Lila Thompson," I said, my voice steady but determined. "I need your help. Nathan and Emma are trying to push me out of the house. They're claiming it belongs to Nathan now, but I need to know what my rights are." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Clarissa responded, her voice calm and measured. "Lila, you have a life estate on the house. That means you have the right to live there for as long as you wish. Nathan can't force you out. It's legally yours as much as it is his." Relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by a surge of something more powerful: anger. I had spent so long catering to their needs, letting them push me around, and now, knowing that I had the legal right to stand my ground made me feel stronger than I had in years. For the first time, I realized I wasn't powerless. I had a voice, and it was time to use it. I hung up the phone and sat quietly for a moment, letting the weight of the conversation sink in. I wasn't going to let Nathan and Emma dictate my future. I wasn't going to be their doormat any longer. If they wanted to play games, I would play too. But this time, I would make sure I was the one in control. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations. I spent hours planning the next dinner party, the one that would change everything. Nathan had no idea what I was about to do. He thought he had won, that he had successfully manipulated me into stepping aside, but I was about to show him that I was not someone to be taken lightly. I went over every detail, making sure that the meal would be flawless, that the house would look perfect. I knew Nathan and Emma would take credit for everything, just as they always did. But this time, I wouldn't be hidden in the background. I would be front and center, and when the time was right, I would expose everything. The guests, who had once admired Nathan for his success, would finally see who had really built that success. They would see me for who I was, not just the invisible mother, but the woman who had worked tirelessly to make sure Nathan's life was everything it was. When the day of the party arrived, I was ready. I had spent hours arranging the flowers, setting the table with my grandmother's china, and preparing a menu that would leave everyone speechless. Beef Wellington, roasted vegetables, and a chocolate souffle that required perfect timing. Every dish was a masterpiece, a reflection of my skill, my hard work, and my years of sacrifice. And this time, I wasn't going to let Emma and Nathan take credit for it. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant black dress. It wasn't designer like Emma's wardrobe, but it was well cut, flattering, and showed that I didn't need to wear expensive labels to command respect. I spent extra time on my makeup and hair, making sure I looked my best. I was no longer the woman who had to blend into the background. I was Lila Thompson, and I would be seen. The guests arrived promptly at 7 p.m., just as I had expected. The house was alive with chatter and laughter, but I wasn't part of it. I remained in the background, serving drinks and refilling glasses, making sure everything went smoothly. Emma and Nathan worked the room, impressing their friends and colleagues with stories of Nathan's success, while I stood in the kitchen, watching. The roles had shifted, but they didn't know it yet. Around 9 p.m., I saw Richard Harrington again. This time, he approached me, his gaze sharp, his presence commanding. He had clearly noticed the tension in the room, the way Nathan was acting, the way Emma seemed on edge. I had never fully realized how much power Richard Harrington held in Nathan's world, but tonight I could see it in the way people gravitated toward him, how Nathan desperately tried to make an impression on him. "Mrs. Thompson," Richard said, his tone casual but observant, "I have to admit, I didn't know you were the one behind all of this. Your cooking, the way you've put this dinner together, it's impressive." I smiled, my heart pounding. "Thank you, Richard," I said, my voice steady. "I've spent a lot of time in the kitchen over the years. It's something I enjoy." Richard's eyes flickered with recognition, as though something had clicked for him. "You're a talented woman, Mrs. Thompson. Nathan's lucky to have you." I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. The words felt too heavy in my mouth. Nathan was so consumed with his image that he had failed to see the value of the woman who had given him everything. But Richard Harrington had seen it. And that, more than anything, was what mattered. By the end of the night, the tension had built to a breaking point. Nathan was beginning to realize that something wasn't right. He had always thought I was a quiet, compliant mother, someone who would never rock the boat. But I had changed. I had been pushed too far, and now I was ready to take back control. As the last guests left, Nathan turned to me, his face flushed with a mixture of wine and anxiety. "Good party," he said, trying to act casual, but I could see the unease in his eyes. "Mr. Peen." Harrington seemed impressed. I smiled, but it wasn't a smile of approval. "I'm glad," I replied, my voice calm, almost distant. "It was a nice evening." But Nathan was too distracted by his own thoughts to notice the change in me, and for the first time I realized that I didn't need his approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. I had done enough, given enough, and now it was my turn to take back what was rightfully mine. This was just the beginning. I would show Nathan and Emma that I was no longer the invisible mother. I would make sure they understood that their manipulation would no longer work on me. The next steps were clear, and I was ready. The morning after the party was a strange mixture of relief and quiet satisfaction. As the first light of day streamed through the windows, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the only sound in the house, the occasional hum of the refrigerator, and the soft whir of the ceiling fan. It felt like the calm before the storm, but I knew that the storm was coming. Nathan and Emma had no idea what I had set in motion the night before, but they would soon enough. The mask I had worn for so long was finally slipping off, and the woman I had buried beneath the years of sacrifice, invisibility, and self-doubt was rising up. I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. The days of living in their shadow, of playing the role of the selfless, overlooked mother, were over. They thought they had won by manipulating me into believing I was just a guest in my own home. But they were wrong. I had played part in their game long enough. But now, it was my turn to turn the tables. It had been almost a week since the party, and I hadn't heard a word from Nathan or Emma. I expected the silence. Nathan, in his arrogance, believed that the silence meant he had won. I could almost hear the smugness in his voice when he told me, so casually, that it was time for me to leave. But there was more to come, much more. I spent the week quietly preparing for what was next. I wasn't going to confront Nathan in anger or frustration. No, that wasn't how I was going to do it. I had learned long ago that the best way to wield power was with control and precision, not emotion. So I made my calls. First to Clarissa, my lawyer, to ensure that everything was in place legally, and then to my financial advisor, just to make sure my affairs were as ironclad as they needed to be. When I spoke to Nathan later that week, it was calm, deliberate, and strategic. It wasn't a confrontation. It was the beginning of the end of his delusion that he could manipulate me with ease. I called him into the living room, a place that had once been a gathering space for family, but now felt like the backdrop of a battle that had been brewing for too long. Nathan stood there, nervous energy emanating from him. He was trying so hard to act casual, but I could tell he was nervous. "Mom," he began, trying to avoid looking directly at me, "Emma and I have been talking. You need to start looking for a new place to live. We've been patient, but this situation just isn't working anymore." I could hear the same tone in his voice, the one that had always used guilt and manipulation to get what he wanted. But I wasn't going to play along this time. "Nathan," I said, my voice steady, "it's funny how you think this is your decision to make. You seem to forget that I have a life estate on this house. The house that Carl and I built together. The house that, legally, is still mine." His face drained of color. The words had hit him harder than I expected. "What are you talking about? That's not what we agreed on. You can't." "I can," I interrupted, calmly and without hesitation. "I've been in touch with Clarissa, and everything is in order. This is my home. Your father left it to me, and you don't have the right to throw me out." For the first time in years, I felt a sense of control. I had spent so long suppressing my emotions, my needs, to cater to Nathan's ambitions. But now I was reclaiming my space, not just in this house, but in my own life. Nathan took a step back, his hand tightening around his drink. "You don't get it, Mom. You've never gotten it. This house, this life, it's mine now. I've worked for this. I've sacrificed everything to get to where I am." I could hear the bitterness in his voice, the resentment that had been simmering underneath the surface for so long. He had always been resentful of the sacrifices I had made for him. He wanted me to be invisible, a silent supporter, not a powerful presence in his life. "You think I haven't sacrificed?" I asked, my voice sharp but controlled. "I gave up everything for you and Emma. My career, my dreams, my sense of self. I spent years putting your needs before my own, and what did I get in return? Disrespect, manipulation, and a reminder every day that I'm no more than a servant in my own home. I don't need your approval, Nathan. I never did. But I've had enough. It's time you learn that actions have consequences." His face shifted from anger to something else. Guilt, perhaps? I wasn't sure. But I wasn't interested in his feelings. Not anymore. "I'm not going anywhere, Nathan," I said firmly. "I've spent years letting you control me, letting you dictate the terms of our relationship. But not anymore. I'm not your servant. I'm not your charity case. I'm your mother, and I deserve respect." He stood there, stunned. I could see the gears turning in his mind as he tried to come up with an excuse, an explanation, a way to manipulate me back into my old role. But it was too late. I wasn't the woman I used to be. "I've already made arrangements," I continued, my voice steady. "In 30 days, you and Emma will be out of this house. You'll find somewhere else to live, and you'll take your children with you. I've already consulted my lawyer, and I'll make sure everything goes smoothly." The silence stretched between us, thick with the weight of what I had just said. Nathan didn't argue. He didn't fight me. He stood there, defeated. And for the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of peace. When he left the room, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I had done it. I had stood up for myself for the first time in a long time, and I wasn't going to stop there. Over the next few days, everything unfolded just as I had planned. Nathan and Emma tried to resist, tried to convince me that I was being unreasonable, but I had the legal right to stay, and they couldn't push me out. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. This was my victory, not just over them, but over myself. Over the woman who had spent too many years hiding in the background, living for others, and never asking for anything in return. I had learned that sometimes, in order to reclaim your life, you have to let go of the people who've been holding you back. And that's exactly what I was doing. 30 days. That was the time I had given them. And by then, Nathan and Emma would understand what it truly meant to take someone for granted. They would feel the weight of their actions just as I had. And I would finally be free. The days after my conversation with Nathan felt like a strange kind of waiting game. The tension in the house was palpable, but this time, it wasn't coming from me. I had said my piece, and I was ready for whatever would come next. I had set the terms, made my demands clear, and I wasn't going to back down. The truth was out, and now it was a matter of whether Nathan and Emma would face the reality of their situation. Nathan had been quiet. The usual bravado, the constant chatter about his work and his successes, was gone. He spent his time holed up in his office or avoiding me altogether. Emma, on the other hand, seemed to be in denial. She would go about her day, pretending as if everything was normal, but I could see the cracks in her facade. She had never expected me to fight back, to stand up for myself. For years, she had been the one in control, manipulating situations to her advantage. Now, she was the one who was being manipulated by her own choices. As for me, I had no time for regret or second-guessing. I wasn't going to apologize for standing my ground. I had spent too many years apologizing for things I hadn't done, for being the person who bent to the will of others. But now, I was reclaiming my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all my own children, make me feel small again. The first week after my ultimatum passed, in a haze of quiet determination, I wasn't going to let myself get caught up in their attempts to guilt-trip me or in their false reassurances. I was moving forward. I called Clarissa again just to make sure everything was in order, and I started the process of preparing for the changes that were coming. I made a list of things I needed to do before they left. There were papers to sort, final decisions to be made, and, most importantly, I had to make sure my own affairs were in order. I wasn't going to let them leave with any part of my strength, my resolve. This was mine, and it always had been. The morning of the second week, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of my blouse, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. Today was the day I would take the next step. I wasn't just sitting around, waiting for them to pack up and leave. I had my own plans to make, my own life to rebuild. My relationship with Nathan and Emma had shifted forever, but that didn't mean it was the end of my journey. It was a new beginning, and this time I was going to make sure it was one on my terms. I walked into the living room where Nathan and Emma were having their usual tense breakfast, pretending like nothing had changed. The kids were in the back, playing quietly. It was just the two of them. But even then, the silence was thick with unspoken words. "Nathan, Emma," I said, my voice steady. They looked up at me, both of them with expressions of apprehension. Nathan tried to mask it with a half smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Emma, on the other hand, didn't even bother pretending. She was uncomfortable, and I could see that she was trying to hold on to the last remnants of control. "I've had time to think," I began, making sure my words were deliberate. "And I want to make it clear that I'm not going to change my mind. You have 30 days to pack up and move out. I know that's not what you want to hear, but it's the reality. I'm not going to continue to live in a house where I'm treated like I'm invisible." Emma opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand to silence her. I wasn't in the mood for excuses or rationalizations. This wasn't a negotiation. "No more excuses, Emma. I've made my decision. It's time for you both to move on with your lives. I'll help you in any way I can, but I'm not going to back down." Nathan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and I could see the cracks in his carefully crafted image. He had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, but now the weight of his own actions was pressing down on him. He tried to look me in the eye, but the anger in his gaze was tempered by something else. Regret, perhaps? Or was it fear? He opened his mouth, then closed it again, realizing there was nothing more to say. Emma, however, wasn't ready to accept this new reality. "Mom, please, you don't understand," she began, but her voice faltered. She had always been the one to get what she wanted with little more than a pout or a few strategically placed words. But I wasn't buying it anymore. "Don't tell me what I understand, Emma," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "You've treated me like a servant for years, and I've allowed it. But not anymore. You've taken everything from me, the respect, the dignity, the sense of purpose. Now, you're going to have to live with the consequences of your choices. I'm done." She stared at me for a moment, trying to figure out how to manipulate the situation in her favor, but I could see the realization dawn on her. She had underestimated me, just like Nathan had. She had thought I was too weak, too old, too tired to fight back. But I had more fight in me than she could ever understand. With a deep breath, I turned and walked away, leaving them both stunned into silence. I wasn't angry. not in the way I once would have been. Anger was too exhausting, too draining. This time, I was calm, collected, and more sure of myself than I had ever been. The rest of the day passed in a blur of quiet activities, sorting through old papers, organizing things that had long been neglected, and mentally preparing for the days ahead. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready. I knew that the next 30 days would bring their fair share of challenges, but I wasn't afraid. I had faced so much worse in my life, and I had always come out on top. That evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, the weight of the day finally settled in. I had made my decision, and there was no turning back. The house, once a symbol of my love for my family, now stood as a reminder of the life I had built for myself, one that I could reclaim and make my own again. The next chapter of my life had begun, and I was going to live it on my terms. The days after my confrontation with Nathan and Emma felt strangely peaceful, but also charged with the anticipation of what was to come. I had finally taken control of my life, and though I knew the next 30 days would bring their challenges, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally shifted. No longer was I a woman silently enduring the whims and manipulations of my family. Now, I was someone who made decisions, took action, and stood firm in her own truth. And that truth was this: I was done being invisible. The house was quieter now. The usual tension between Nathan and Emma, the subtle jabs and unspoken resentment, had faded into an almost uncomfortable silence. I could feel their unease. They had both expected me to back down, to apologize, to fall into line as I always had. But this time they were wrong. This time, I wasn't the woman they could push around. In the days following my ultimatum, Nathan spent more time at work, probably hoping to avoid the inevitable confrontation. I didn't care what he did or where he went anymore. He could try to avoid me, try to convince himself that everything would somehow go back to normal, but it wasn't going to happen. The manipulation that had worked for so many years was no longer effective. He had crossed a line, and now there were consequences. Emma, on the other hand, took a different approach. She tried to play the part of the victim, the one who was caught in the middle of this unnecessary drama. She called me a few times, trying to soften the blow, asking if we could talk things through, but I wasn't interested in talking anymore. I had spent years listening to her, to both of them, as they twisted my actions, as they dismissed my sacrifices. Now the only thing I wanted was for them to leave. I had given them enough chances to show respect, to show love. They had failed. The morning after the phone call with Emma, I sat in the living room, looking around at the house I had spent so many years maintaining. It was still beautiful, still a place I had worked hard to make a home. But now, it felt different. It was no longer a symbol of my devotion to them, a place where I had poured my heart and soul into raising a family. It was a place I had to protect, a place that belonged to me, not to them. And I was determined to keep it that way. The next few days were spent organizing. I went through old paperwork, cleared out clutter, and started making plans for what I would do once they were gone. It wasn't just about the house. It was about rebuilding my life, finding out who I was again. For so long, I had been Lila, the mother, the caretaker, the one who always put everyone else first. But now, I was Lila Thompson, a woman who had spent too many years in the background, and I wasn't going to waste another moment letting that happen. The 30-day timeline I had given them was quickly approaching, and with it, my own sense of purpose was starting to solidify. I wasn't going to just sit idly by and wait for them to leave. I was going to make sure that this time, I was in control of the situation. I wanted to move forward with my life, to reclaim the pieces of myself I had lost over the years. And it all started with this final step. Nathan and Emma knew they had no choice but to comply with my demands. They were angry, yes, but they knew they couldn't fight me on this. I had the law on my side. And while they may have tried to manipulate me emotionally, there was no more power in that. They had lost. And for the first time, I could feel the power shift back in my favor. As the deadline drew nearer, I started taking small steps toward reclaiming my life. I went through the old business papers Carl and I had kept, reminding myself of the woman I had been before everything changed. I wasn't just a mother. I was a woman who had built a successful business, who had made something out of nothing. The memories of that time, of working alongside Carl, of building Franklin and Associates from the ground up, filled me with a quiet pride. That woman still existed inside me, waiting to come back to life. I found myself spending hours on the phone, talking to old business contacts, catching up with people I hadn't spoken to in years. They were all amazed by my strength, by how I had kept my head high despite everything that had happened. I realized, as I spoke to them, how much I had missed the woman I had been, the confident, determined woman who had built something meaningful. That woman wasn't gone, not by a long shot. She was still there, waiting for her moment. The day before Nathan and Emma were supposed to leave, I took a walk through the garden that Carl and I had spent so many years tending to together. The roses were blooming, their deep red petals catching the sunlight, reminding me of everything that had once been. I could almost hear Carl's voice, telling me how proud he was of the life we had created. And for the first time in a long while, I felt his presence, not as a memory, but as something real, something that still lived inside me. I had never allowed myself to feel grief for long. Carl had always been my rock, my partner, and when he was gone, I had clung to the idea that my family needed me, that I could still make a difference. But I had done my part. Now it was time for me to take care of myself, to honor the legacy Carl had left behind by being the woman I was meant to be. The next morning, as Nathan and Emma packed up their things, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. It wasn't just about them leaving. It was about me finally taking control of my life. I had made my peace with the decisions I had made, and while I would always love my children, I had learned a hard lesson about boundaries, respect, and the price of self-sacrifice. I was no longer the woman who would silently fade into the background. I was a force in my own right, and it was time for the world to see that. Nathan and Emma left that afternoon. There were no grand goodbyes, no apologies. They were gone, and just like that, my house, my life, was mine again. The silence that followed their departure wasn't oppressive. It was peaceful, cleansing. And in that silence, I found something I hadn't realized I had been missing for years: myself. I walked through the empty rooms, taking in the stillness. There was no resentment, no anger, only a sense of finality. I had fought for my dignity, my home, and my peace. And in the end, I had won. The days after Nathan and Emma left were strange. There was a stillness in the house, a quiet that felt different from the usual calm I had once cherished. This silence was earned, a result of years of effort, of giving everything I had and getting nothing in return. Now that the house was truly mine again, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of relief and emptiness. The space was free of their presence, but it was also void of the noise that had been a constant in my life. It was a new beginning, one I had worked hard to achieve, but it also meant something else, a future that would have to be shaped without them. I spent the first few days walking through the house, taking in the emptiness, trying to fill the silence with something meaningful. The memories of Nathan and Emma were everywhere. Their toys, their books, their lives that had taken over the place. Now, it was just me. It was hard to imagine what life would be like without them underfoot, without the constant undercurrent of resentment and manipulation that had plagued me for so long. It was hard to know what my next step would be, but that uncertainty didn't scare me the way it used to. In fact, it felt liberating. I had always been a person who found meaning in taking care of others. I had been raised to believe that a mother's love was endless, that the role of a mother was to serve her children no matter the cost. And for so many years, I had done just that. But now, I was free of that expectation. No one needed me to sacrifice anymore. No one was waiting for me to give up my needs for theirs. And for the first time in years, I could hear my own voice again, clear and strong. The phone calls started coming a few days after Nathan and Emma's departure. Old business contacts reached out, asking how I was doing, checking in, offering support. I hadn't realized how much I had missed these connections, how much I had neglected myself in favor of my family. As I talked to these people who had respected me, people who had worked with me when I was running Franklin Associates, I felt a sense of belonging again. I wasn't just someone's mother or wife or caretaker. I was Lila Thompson, a woman who had built something meaningful, who had made a name for herself. And that woman was still here, still capable, still worthy of success. I spent a lot of time reflecting on my career, on the things I had given up for Nathan and Emma. I thought about Franklin and Associates, the consulting firm Carl and I had built together. We had started with nothing, just a small office and a dream, but we'd turned it into one of the most respected firms in the region. The money, the success had come later, but that wasn't the part I missed. What I missed was the sense of purpose, the feeling of accomplishment that came with building something from the ground up. And for so many years, I had let that part of myself fade into the background, obscured by the demands of family life. But that woman, the one who had taken risks, who had built something of her own, was still in me, and it was time to bring her back. I started to make plans, not just plans for the house, but for my future. I had always been good at managing details, at staying organized and focused. Now, I applied those skills to myself. I began researching business opportunities, ways I could re-enter the workforce in a way that aligned with my skills and passions. I knew I wouldn't jump back into the corporate world the way I had before. That part of me had changed, but I didn't have to leave that world behind completely. I could find a way to work that was meaningful and fulfilling, that didn't require me to sacrifice myself again. One afternoon, as I sat at my desk, Carl's old desk, the one we had worked at together for years, I received a call from an old colleague, Peter, who had worked with me during the early days of Franklin and Associates. He had moved on to another company, but we had always stayed in touch. He was now looking for someone with my background to help with a project that involved consulting on business strategies for startups. I could feel the spark of excitement reigniting within me. This was it. This was my chance to step back into the world I had left behind, but on my own terms. "Peter, I'm in," I said without hesitation when he explained the details. "Let's make it happen." It was a small step, but it was the first real step toward reclaiming my independence, my career, and my life. I had always prided myself on my ability to adapt, to make things work, no matter the circumstances. Now, I was putting that resilience to the test again, but this time, it was for me. Over the next few weeks, I began to feel the weight lifting from my shoulders. The house felt different without Nathan and Emma's presence. It felt lighter, freer, as if I could breathe again. I started working on the business proposal for Peter's project, organizing my ideas and strategies with the same clarity and precision I had used when Carl and I first started Franklin and Associates. It felt good, it felt right, but it wasn't just about the work. It was about reclaiming my life, my identity. For so long, I had been defined by my relationship with my children, by the sacrifices I made for them. But now, I was defining myself. I wasn't just someone's mother or caretaker. I was Lila Thompson, a woman who had built something meaningful and was ready to do it again. One afternoon, as I walked through the garden, I stopped to admire the roses Carl and I had planted together so many years ago. The deep red petals caught the sunlight, and for a moment I was overwhelmed with gratitude. I had made it through the hardest part of my life, and I had come out stronger. I had taken back control, not just of my home, but of my future. The woman I had once been was still here, and she was ready to take on the world once more. As I stood there in the garden, I realized that the house, the family, and the life I had built with Carl were all part of me. But they didn't define me anymore. I defined me, and that was the most powerful realization of all. The next chapter was mine to write, and I was ready to do it on my own terms. The days following Nathan and Emma's departure felt strangely calm, but also tinged with a quiet, almost unnerving sense of finality. I spent the first few days walking through the house, taking in the stillness, the emptiness. Everything was exactly where it had always been. Carl's old leather chair in the living room, the grand piano in the corner of the study, the photographs on the walls of happier times. But without Nathan and Emma here, it was like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to change. And I knew, deep down, that the change wasn't just in the house. It was in me. I had spent so many years trying to be everything for everyone else, silently pushing my own needs and desires aside. I had convinced myself that family came first, that my love and sacrifice for them would eventually be appreciated. But in the end, I had learned the hard way that love and sacrifice don't always guarantee respect. and I wasn't going to allow that to happen anymore. I had spent too many years allowing myself to fade into the background, waiting for recognition that never came. Now I was done. I was reclaiming my space, my life, and my future. The first few nights after they left, I found myself unable to sleep. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me. There was a part of me that missed the noise, the constant presence of Nathan and Emma, even if it had always been complicated. It was strange to realize how much I had become accustomed to the chaos, the tension. But as the nights passed, I started to feel something new: freedom. I wasn't bound by their expectations anymore. I wasn't playing the role of the ever-sacrificing mother or the dutiful housekeeper. I was free to be myself, to rediscover who I was beyond my family's needs. During the day, I threw myself into work. The project with Peter was moving along faster than I had expected, and I was grateful for the distraction. It felt good to be doing something that was entirely my own, something that was about me and my abilities. I had always prided myself on my mind, on my ability to create strategies, to problem solve, to see patterns others couldn't. This project was the first real step in reconnecting with that side of myself, the part of me that had been buried for so long under the weight of motherhood, family expectations, and sacrifices. As I worked, I felt a sense of excitement creeping back into my bones, the kind of excitement I hadn't felt in years. I began spending more time outside, walking through the garden that Carl and I had built together. The roses, the ones he had planted with such care all those years ago, were blooming again, their deep red petals unfurling in the spring sunshine. I would stand there gazing at them, and for a moment I could almost feel him beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his voice in my ear. I had always thought that once he was gone, I would feel lost, untethered. But the more time I spent in the garden, the more I realized that Carl wasn't gone. He lived in everything we had built, in the memories we had created, and most importantly, in me. His strength, his vision, his ambition, it was all part of who I was. And that was something no one could take away from me. As the weeks went by, the house started to feel more like mine again, not just in a physical sense, but in an emotional one. I rearranged a few things, put away the reminders of Nathan and Emma's time here, and slowly I began to make it my own space once more. I painted the study a soft shade of blue, the color Carl had always wanted, but never gotten around to. I cleared out the old furniture from the living room and replaced it with pieces that reflected my style, pieces that spoke to the woman I was becoming. Every change, no matter how small, felt like an act of reclaiming my power, my independence. I also began to reach out to old friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years. I had always been so focused on Nathan and Emma that I had neglected my own social life, my own friendships. But now, with the space to breathe, I started reconnecting with the people who had been there for me before the weight of family obligations had taken over. The conversations were different this time, less about what I could do for them and more about what we could do together. I laughed more than I had in years, felt more at ease in my own skin than I had in a long time. But the real change came one evening, when I sat down with a bottle of wine and the financial documents I had been avoiding for weeks. It had been so easy to put everything off when Nathan and Emma were here, to tell myself that I didn't need to worry about money, about investments, about the future. But now it was time to face it head on. I needed to take control of my finances to ensure that I was making decisions for myself and not relying on anyone else to make them for me. As I went through the documents, I realized how much I had let slip. There were investments that had fallen by the wayside, opportunities I had passed up because I didn't think I deserved them. I had always deferred to Carl, then Nathan, when it came to managing our money. But now, I was the one in charge. The responsibility felt heavy, but it also felt empowering. I wasn't just managing a household anymore. I was managing my future. I started making plans, adjusting my portfolio, and setting goals for what I wanted to achieve in the next few years. I made a list of things I wanted to do, places I wanted to visit, people I wanted to reconnect with. I had spent so much of my life putting everyone else's needs first, but now it was my turn. It was my turn to live for me, to build a life that reflected my own desires, not those of others. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had the power to do exactly that. I wasn't just a mother or a wife or a caretaker. I was Lila Thompson, a woman with a past, a present, and a future. And that future was going to be everything I had always dreamed of. Only this time it would be on my terms. By the time I finished my glass of wine that night, I knew something had changed in me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. The weeks following Nathan and Emma's departure felt like a strange period of transformation. Every day I woke up with a sense of possibility that I hadn't had in years. It wasn't the kind of hope I had once clung to, the hope that things might improve with my family, or that love and sacrifice would eventually be recognized. This was different. It was a quiet, deep-rooted confidence in myself and the future I was finally taking hold of. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just waiting for something to change. I was making change happen on my own terms. The house had taken on a new energy, one that was uniquely mine. I had rearranged the furniture, painted the walls, and slowly started to fill the spaces with things that reflected who I was now. The grand piano that had once been Carl's sat in the corner of the living room, and I had placed a vase of fresh flowers next to it, something Carl would have done when we were still together. It felt like he was still a part of this place, a part of me, but not in a way that weighed me down. His memory wasn't a burden. It was a quiet source of strength, reminding me of the resilience we had shared and the life we had built together. I had started working on the project with Peter, diving into the details of the business strategy we were putting together for a series of new startups. At first, I had hesitated, wondering if it was too soon, if I was rushing back into the world of business too quickly. But the more I immersed myself in the work, the more I realized how much I had missed this part of my life. It wasn't just about the money or the success. It was about the process, the intellectual challenge, and the satisfaction of seeing something grow from an idea into reality. This was my domain, my space, and it was exhilarating to feel that familiar spark of excitement again. The woman who had once run Franklin and Associates, who had built a reputation on her intelligence and sharp instincts, was still very much alive. But there was something else happening, something I hadn't expected. I was beginning to rediscover pieces of myself that had been buried for so long. I had always been so focused on others, on Nathan, Emma, Carl, and the endless demands of family life, that I had forgotten what it was like to simply enjoy being me. I started taking walks in the mornings, going to the farmer's market on weekends, and spending time with old friends I hadn't seen in years. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone anymore. I could do what I wanted when I wanted without feeling guilty or obligated. I began to take better care of myself, both physically and emotionally. I started exercising again, something I had abandoned when the demands of family life took over. I felt stronger, more energetic, and surprisingly at peace with myself. I even treated myself to a spa day one Saturday, something I hadn't done in decades. It wasn't about indulgence. It was about taking the time to reconnect with myself, to honor the woman I had been all along but had neglected in the pursuit of others' happiness. And yet, as much as I relished this newfound freedom, there were still moments when I felt the weight of the past. I would walk through the garden and see the roses blooming, a reminder of Carl, and feel a pang of longing for the life we had shared. I still missed him, still wished he were here to see me standing tall, to see me reclaiming my power. But that longing no longer felt like a heavy burden. It was a gentle ache, a reminder of the love we had shared, and a driving force for the future I was now building. One evening, as I sat in the living room with a glass of wine in hand, reflecting on the changes I had made, the phone rang. It was Emma. I had been waiting for this call, knowing that sooner or later she would reach out. I hadn't heard from her since the day they left, and while I had no illusions about her intentions, I picked up the phone anyway. "Mom," she began, her voice tentative. "I've been thinking about everything, about what happened. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I know I've made mistakes. I didn't realize how much I was taking you for granted, and I'm sorry for that." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't the apology I had been waiting for, but it was the acknowledgement I had longed for. It was a step, albeit a small one, toward healing. but I wasn't sure how to respond. For so long, I had craved her approval, her love, but now I realized that I didn't need it in the way I once had. I wasn't the same person I had been when they left. I was stronger, more independent, and more self-assured. "I appreciate your apology, Emma," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But this isn't just about you saying sorry. This is about recognizing what I've given up, what I've lost, and what I've been through. I've spent my life taking care of everyone else. It's time for me to take care of myself now, and that means setting boundaries." There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought she might argue, might try to make me feel guilty. But she didn't. Instead, I heard her sigh, a sound that carried a mixture of regret and acceptance. "I understand, Mom. I really do. I just, I want you to know that I'm sorry, and I hope we can find a way to rebuild things, even if it takes time." I thought about her words, about the long road ahead of us, and for the first time, I didn't feel the overwhelming need to rush back into a relationship with her. I was open to healing, to rebuilding, but on my terms. I wasn't going to beg for her love or approval anymore. I had earned my place in this world, and I wasn't going to let anyone diminish that. "I'm willing to work on it," I said, my voice steady, "but I need time, and I need you to understand that things are different now. I'm different now." We ended the conversation on a tentative note, both of us unsure of what the future held. But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't the woman I had been before. I was stronger, more independent, and ready to face whatever came next. Whether or not Emma understood that, I couldn't say. But I finally understood myself, and that was enough. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling the sunlight streaming through the windows, warming the floors of the house I had fought so hard to reclaim. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace with myself. I was no longer living in the shadow of my past or the expectations of others. I was living for me, for the future I had yet to build, for the life I had finally decided to claim as my own. The road ahead wasn't easy, but it was mine, and I was ready to walk it. Life is too short to live for others at the expense of your own happiness and well-being. It's easy to get caught up in the expectations of family, friends, and society, but true fulfillment comes from knowing and honoring your own worth. Don't wait for others to recognize your value. Take the time to acknowledge it yourself. Set boundaries, protect your peace, and don't be afraid to walk away from relationships or situations that diminish you. Growth often comes from discomfort, from pushing yourself to step out of the shadows and into your own light. You don't need anyone's approval to live a meaningful life. Reclaim your power by focusing on what brings you joy, purpose, and self-respect. Take the time to reconnect with your passions, rediscover who you are beyond your roles as a partner, parent, or caretaker. The most important relationship you'll ever have is with yourself. Surround yourself with people who uplift and respect you, and be willing to let go of those who do not. Life is a journey of rediscovery, and the greatest gift you can give yourself is the freedom to live authentically and unapologetically. Don't let anyone steal your peace. Make it your own.